Johnny Cash didn't just perform at Folsom Prison on January 13, 1968. He accidentally triggered the most dangerous conspiracy in American prison history. What the world never knew was that hidden beneath the applause and cheers, a coded message was being transmitted. Every song choice, every pause between words, every gesture Johnny made was part of a plan that would either liberate 47 innocent men or destroy the man in black forever. But here's what makes absolutely no sense. Johnny had never communicated with any of these prisoners before, so why were they already mouthing along to lyrics that hadn't been officially written yet? The answer lies buried in a recording that the FBI sealed for 55 years. And when you discover what Johnny whispered between songs, you'll understand why some truths were meant to stay hidden in the darkness, because what happened in the hours after that legendary performance didn't just change Johnny Cash's life. It marked him as a target, and if you're following this story closely enough to see the pattern emerging, you need to understand that some knowledge comes with a price. The recording equipment was still warm when Warden Charles Duffy noticed something that made his blood run cold. January 13th, 1968, 4:47 p.m., Folsom State Prison's mess hall had been cleared of prisoners. But the echo of Johnny Cash's voice still seemed to bounce off the concrete walls. The official cameras had stopped rolling. The Columbia Records crew was packing up their equipment, and Johnny himself was backstage, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a prison-issued towel. But what Warden Duffy discovered in the sound booth would haunt him for the next 30 years. Hidden beneath the main recording console was a secondary device, a small, sophisticated recording unit that shouldn't have existed in 1968. The technology was at least a decade ahead of anything available to the public. Its red recording light was still blinking, and when Duffy pressed the playback button, what he heard made him question everything he thought he knew about Johnny Cash's visit. The voice on the tape belonged to someone who had been declared dead 6 months earlier. Phase 1 complete, said a voice that Duffy recognized immediately. It was Thomas Garrett, former Folsom guard, officially killed in a car accident in July 1967. The message has been delivered. Subject Johnny is unaware of his role, but the prisoners received the transmission clearly. How was a dead man operating recording equipment inside a maximum security prison? Duffy's hands trembled as he continued listening. The recording revealed a conversation between Garrett and an unknown female voice, discussing something called Operation Redemption. They spoke about Johnny Cash as if he were an unwitting messenger, carrying information that would help certain prisoners escape, not physically, but legally. The woman's voice carried an accent that didn't belong in 1960s California. The documents are already in motion, she said, her voice carrying what sounded like a faint European inflection. By tomorrow morning, the appeals will be filed simultaneously. The 3 judges we need are already in position. What appeals? Which judges? And why did her voice sound like it was being transmitted from another decade entirely? Duffy grabbed the phone to call the FBI, but before he could dial, the recording device emitted a high-pitched whine and began smoking. Within seconds, the mysterious technology had literally melted into an unrecognizable mass of plastic and metal. But the damage was already done. Duffy had heard enough to know that Johnny Cash's concert was never about entertainment. 3 hours later, Duffy made a discovery that would change his understanding of the American justice system forever. In his office safe, behind files he hadn't touched in years, Duffy found an envelope that hadn't been there that morning. It was addressed to him in handwriting he recognized his own, but he had never written it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a list of 47 prisoner names, and next to each name was a date from the future. How could his own handwriting predict events that hadn't happened yet? The first date was January 15th, 1968, just 2 days away. Next to it was written, Marcus Thompson, evidence of innocence surfaces. The second date was January 20th, David Rodriguez, key witness, recants testimony. The list continued, spanning the next 3 months, each entry detailing how specific prisoners would suddenly have their cases reopened. But when Duffy cross-referenced the names with his prison roster, he discovered something that defied explanation. All 47 men had been in the mess hall during Johnny's performance. All 47 had been positioned in specific seats that formed a pattern. A pattern that, when viewed from above, looked exactly like the stage layout Johnny had requested for his concert. Who had arranged the seating, and why did it match a diagram that Johnny's team claimed they had created randomly? Duffy pulled the concert footage and watched it frame by frame. What he saw made him question reality itself. During the performance of Folsom Prison Blues, Johnny had made 7 specific gestures pointing to different sections of the audience, adjusting his guitar in particular ways, even the timing of when he took sips of water. Each gesture corresponded exactly to the seating pattern of the 47 men. And then Duffy noticed something that made his vision blur with panic. In the background of one frame, barely visible behind the stage equipment, stood a figure in a guard's uniform. The face was clear enough to identify Thomas Garrett, the man who had supposedly died 6 months ago. Watching Johnny's performance with the intensity of someone monitoring a military operation, if Garrett was alive, who was buried in his grave? When Duffy finally reached FBI agent Sarah Chun at 11:30 p.m., her response suggested she had been expecting his call. "Warden Duffy," Agent Chun said before he could introduce himself. "We need to talk, but not over the phone. Meet me at the Denny's on Highway 50 in 1 hour. Come alone and bring whatever evidence you found today." How did she know he had found evidence? The drive to the restaurant felt like the longest hour of Duffy's life. Every shadow seemed to hide watchers. Every car behind him felt like surveillance. When he arrived, Agent Chun was already seated in a corner booth, her federal ID prominently displayed, but her face carrying an expression of someone who had seen too much. Chun's first words shattered everything Duffy thought he knew about Johnny Cash's career. "This is the 3rd time," she said quietly, sliding a manila folder across the table. "Johnny doesn't know it, but he's been used as a carrier before. Each time, inmates who shouldn't have legal hope suddenly find themselves with new evidence. New witnesses, new chances. What were the other 2 times? And why was Johnny chosen as an unknowing accomplice?" The folder contained photographs from concerts at other prisons, San Quentin in 1966, and a smaller facility in Texas in 1967. In each image, Chun had circled figures in the background. Men in official uniforms who were supposed to be dead. Women with faces that appeared in multiple decades of government photographs, and technical equipment that shouldn't have existed in those time periods. But the most disturbing discovery was a letter written in Johnny's own handwriting, a letter he swore he had never written. Dated 6 months in the future, the letter was addressed to June Carter. "My dearest June, I now understand that my music has been carrying messages I never intended to send. The work is dangerous, but necessary. Some men deserve freedom that the system will never give them. I pray you'll forgive what I must do next." How could Johnny write about events that hadn't happened yet? And what did he mean by "what I must do next"? Agent Chun leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "There's something else you need to know about tomorrow." At exactly 9:17 a.m. on January 15th, everything Duffy had read in his mysteriously appearing list began to unfold. Marcus Thompson, prisoner number 4419, was sitting in his cell when a guard he had never seen before handed him a manila envelope. Inside were legal documents that proved his innocence, documents that had supposedly been destroyed in a courthouse fire 3 years earlier. The evidence was so compelling that his lawyer, who had given up on the case, immediately filed for an emergency hearing. Who had preserved these documents, and why were they surfacing now? But Thompson's case was just the beginning of what would become known as the Folsom Miracle. Over the next 72 hours, similar evidence packages arrived for 12 more prisoners from the list. Cold cases were suddenly hot again. Witnesses who had refused to cooperate for years were calling lawyers. Evidence that had been buried in bureaucratic files was mysteriously finding its way to defense attorneys. Was this divine intervention, or was someone with incredible resources orchestrating the largest legal conspiracy in American history? Meanwhile, Johnny Cash had returned to his normal life. Seemingly unaware of the chaos his concert had triggered, he was recording in Nashville, playing shows, and preparing for his next tour. But those close to him noticed changes. He seemed distracted, occasionally stopping mid-conversation as if listening to voices only he could hear. June Carter was the first to notice that Johnny was receiving phone calls at exactly 3:33 a.m. every night. When she answered one of these calls, the voice on the other end said something that made her blood freeze. "Tell the man in black that the real concert is about to begin, and this time he won't be able to claim ignorance." Who knew Johnny's private number? And what did they mean by the real concert? 3 weeks after Folsom, Agent Chun discovered that the 47 prisoners weren't randomly selected. They were all connected by a single, impossible thread. Each man had been convicted using evidence processed by the same forensic laboratory facility that, according to federal records, had never existed. The laboratory's supposed location was a vacant lot in downtown Sacramento. Its staff roster contained names of people who had died years before the lab's alleged opening date. How do you convict dozens of men using evidence from a laboratory that never existed? Chun's investigation revealed a deeper conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the justice system. Judges, prosecutors, and forensic experts had all participated in a systematic effort to imprison innocent men. But the question remained, why these specific 47 individuals? The answer came from an unexpected source, a letter written by Johnny Cash's father in 1932. Ray Cash had written to his future son about a promise he had made to help the forgotten ones. The letter, discovered in Johnny's childhood home, contained a list of names that wouldn't be born for another generation, but that exactly matched the 47 prisoners at Folsom. How could Johnny's father predict the names of people who hadn't been born yet? By February 15, 1968, Johnny Cash was experiencing phenomena that defied explanation. He began writing songs in his sleep-complete compositions that he would find written in his own handwriting on his nightstand each morning. The lyrics spoke of prisons he had never visited, men he had never met, and injustices that hadn't yet been discovered. When he played these songs for his band, they claimed he had already taught them the melodies months earlier. Was Johnny becoming a prophet? Or was someone implanting memories and knowledge in his mind? The situation reached a crisis point when Johnny received a package containing photographs of himself at events he had never attended. The images showed him at legal hearings for the 47 prisoners, standing next to lawyers he had never met, apparently testifying on behalf of men he claimed not to know. In each photograph, Johnny appeared to be speaking passionately, as if he knew intimate details about each case. If Johnny had never attended these hearings, who was the man in the photographs? Who looked exactly like him? June Carter confronted Johnny about the photographs, but his response terrified her more than any explanation could have. "I remember being there," he said quietly. "I remember every word I said, every face in those courtrooms, but I also remember being in Nashville, recording with you on every one of those dates." Agent Chun's investigation had reached a dead end until she discovered that someone had been accessing her files, someone with security clearance that exceeded her own. The access logs showed that her investigation reports were being downloaded minutes after she filed them, by someone using credentials that belonged to J. Edgar Hoover himself. But when she called the FBI director's office, she was told that Hoover was in Washington and had never accessed the system. Who was using the FBI director's credentials to monitor the investigation into Johnny Cash? The breakthrough came when Chun decided to investigate the mysterious European woman's voice from the original recording. Using advanced audio analysis available only to federal agencies, she isolated background sounds from the recording, hidden. Beneath the woman's voice was the faint sound of church bells, bells that played a specific sequence that Chun recognized from her childhood in San Francisco. Why were San Francisco church bells audible in a recording made inside a California prison? The bell sequence led Chun to St. Mary's Cathedral, where the archivist revealed that those specific bells had been destroyed in the 1906 earthquake. The sequence Chun had heard was from a recording made in 1905, a recording that should have been impossible to play in 1968, but the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. In the cathedral's archives, Chun found a photograph from 1905 showing the church choir. In the front row, unmistakably visible, stood a woman who looked exactly like the figure she had seen in the background of Johnny's Folsom concert footage. Woman who appeared to be the same age in both photographs. Despite the 63-year gap between them, how could the same woman appear unchanged across more than 6 decades? As March approached, Johnny began receiving visitors who claimed to be from his future. These visitors knew details about albums he hadn't recorded, concerts he hadn't performed, and personal events that hadn't happened. They spoke of a version of Johnny Cash who had become something more than a musician, a figure who used his fame to systematically expose corruption in the American justice system. Were these visitors delusional fans, or were they actually from a timeline where Johnny had embraced his role as an agent of justice? The final piece of the puzzle came when Johnny discovered that his guitar, the same guitar he had played at Folsom, had been modified. Hidden inside the instrument was a device that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. When he showed it to a local electronics expert, the man's face went pale. "This technology," he said, "won't be invented for another 20 years. Who had modified Johnny's guitar, and how are they using technology from the future?" On March 15th, exactly 2 months after Folsom, Johnny Cash made a decision that would change everything. Standing in his home studio, holding the futuristic device from his guitar, Johnny spoke into the empty room. "I know you're listening. I know you've been using me, and I know that tomorrow something is going to happen that will force me to choose between my music and the truth." The response came immediately, not through his phone or radio, but through every electronic device in his house simultaneously. "Johnny," said the voice, the same European woman from the prison recording, "tomorrow you'll understand that you were never chosen randomly. Your family has been part of this for 3 generations, and the concert at Folsom was just your audition." As the voice faded, Johnny looked out his window to see a line of black cars approaching his home. Inside the lead car, visible through the windshield, sat Agent Chun, but her face showed no recognition, as if she had never met him before. And as Johnny realized that everything he thought he knew about the past 2 months had been carefully orchestrated, the recording device in his hand began to glow with an impossible light. The truth about Folsom Prison, about the 47 men, about his own family's role in this conspiracy, was about to be revealed. But some revelations come with a price, and if you've been following this story closely enough to recognize the pattern, the dates, the names, the impossible coincidences, then you already understand why this episode has to end here. Because Johnny Cash was about to learn that walking into Folsom Prison hadn't made him a hero, it had made him a target.